The Challenger 2, the British Army's main battle tank, has been in the headlines recently with its anticipated deployment to the Ukraine. Now, I've worked alongside the Challenger and I can tell you, it's an impressive piece of kit. You would not want to be on the receiving end of that 120mm gun. It would definitely ruin your day. But don't be fooled. This 70-ton, all-singing, all-dancing vehicle is not invincible. In this episode, I'm going to explain how this £4 million tank, packed with all the latest technology, was sacrificed, needlessly blown up by an improvised explosive device costing a couple of £100. I'm Richard C. Pendry. For the last 18 years, I've been on the front line on the war on terror. I've seen some amazing, incredible things, and this is just one of the stories. So please, if I've got your attention, press subscribe and press notification to hear for updates.
Roger, enemy regulars been seen in the wood line approximately 3 to 4 kilometers to the following, switching to Charlie Delta on the briefing in action.
The last two wars that the British Army have fought, Iraq and Afghanistan, have been what the military call asymmetrical. Asymmetrical meaning surprise attacks by small, lightly armed groups against a military force armed with modern high-tech weaponry. Like the Taliban, for example, who were able to defeat NATO, a vastly more sophisticated opponent, while wearing flip-flops, armed with 50-year-old assault rifles and homemade bombs. Now, the use of the main battle tank is extremely limited in asymmetrical warfare. Armoured vehicles do not fare well in urban settings, for example. The Challenger was not used by British military in Afghanistan, but it was used in Iraq, and this is where this event took place. But before I tell you how this £4 million vehicle was blown up by an improvised explosive device costing a few £100, you have to understand the context. So here we have a map of Iraq. Right in the middle is Baghdad, the capital. Al-Mosul, or Mosul, which is Iraq's second biggest city, that was taken by Islamic State and retaken by the coalition in 2017. Spent a number of occasions going back and forth to Mosul on the front line. That was very interesting. Al-Basra is down in the bottom right hand corner, and just above Basra, in that area there, is where the two famous rivers of Iraq, the Tigris and the Euphrates, join together, and they become the Shatt al-Arab, which runs through Basra and then out into the Persian Gulf. So Basra was the British Army area of operation during the Iraq War. I spent 2.5 years in Basra as a civilian working for a private military company, a PMC. Some called us mercenaries. The term mercenary has become a bit of a bad word. It's been bandied about a lot recently. Wagner Group, for example, in Ukraine. But Wagner consists of Russians fighting for Russia. All a bit confusing. But if you want, we can talk about Wagner Group another time. The definition of a mercenary is a hired professional soldier who fights for a foreign state or nation for money. I was allowed to deliver lethal force on behalf of the US government, and our company was better armed and equipped than some military units. So was I a mercenary? You can make up your own mind. I prefer soldier of fortune. I think it falls off the tongue a little bit. It's a bit more boyzone, a bit more romanticised. The company I worked for was very cosmopolitan. We employed soldiers from many different countries and indeed continents. We were a bit of a foreign legion in that respect, but we were mostly Brits. Our job was to provide security to the United States Army Corps of Engineers, an American military formation that was heavily involved with the reconstruction effort after the Second Gulf War. Basra was the British Mill battle space, area of operations, and my colleagues and I spent a great deal of time working alongside British military units that were well known to us. I ended up as the Regional Security Manager, RSM, great title, and as such had access to the M&D Southeast, the British military HQ. My company had a desk in the middle of the operations room, as part of our job was to liaise with other security companies and PMCs involved with the reconstruction effort. I would go back and forth to the divisional HQ on a regular basis to visit our desk and get an update from our intelligence analysts, who had their ears securely pinned to the floor. One of our team was ex-US Special Forces and quickly made friends with other Americans on attachment there. Now, back in 2007, Britmill did not have an unmanned air vehicle, a UAV capability, UAV being the official name for a drone, and had to rely on air assets from the US Navy and Air Force. They were used for reconnaissance purposes. The first Britmill drone strike in Iraq wasn't until 2014, and then it was up north against Islamic State targets around Mosul. The American desk, crammed with screens capturing their live feed from their UAVs, soaring several miles above Basra, was located close to ours, and of course my US Special Forces colleague had made friends with them. Unlike the rest of Britmill, who considered us as pond life, there was generally a great deal of hostility towards military contractors by the soldiers of Britmill. We got on great with the Americans. They were a friendly bunch, reservists mostly, called up from their civilian lives to do their part for the war on terror, and were only too glad to get into a conversation to make their 12-hour shift pass a bit quicker. Now, before I tell you about the conversation I had with the US Navy Petty Officer on the morning of the 7th of April 2007, a conversation which, to be honest, still haunts me to this very day, you need to know the course of events leading up to it. Movement around Basra was challenging. The preference was to use helicopters in what is called an air bridge, ferrying troops from the relative safety of the airport a few miles to the west of the city to the several bases within the city limits. But when a helicopter was shot down by a surface-to-air missile in the skies above Basra in May 2006, things dramatically changed for the worse. Sorties by Britmill helicopters were severely reduced, with the only other option being movement by road. I'm not going to talk about the Lynx helicopter a great deal in this episode because it deserves an episode all on its own. I have friends who assisted Britmill in containing the incident. They were pretty much first on the scene and so are able to give a first-hand account of what went on. It'll make for an interesting, possibly even controversial episode. Britmill is desperate to forget the shooting down of the Lynx in Basra. Not because of the death of the 5 crew members, which is of course tragic, but because it had a catastrophic impact on the whole war effort and ultimately, in my opinion, led to the retreat from Basra by Britmill in September 2007 and eventually their exit from Iraq in 2009. For me, it shows how flawed the overall military plan was and how little the senior officers understood about the context that they were working within. So let's have a look at the map. Basra has a population of around about 1.4 million and is quite new by Iraqi standards. It was founded in the 7th century AD. Very close to the border with Iran, and a great deal of fighting took place in the area during the Iran-Iraq war back in the 1980s. Basra was built on the Shatt al-Arab, and that's this water feature here, which runs all the way through it. The Shatt al-Arab is the combination of the 2 great rivers in Iraq, that's the Tigris and the Euphrates, and it runs right through the city and empties into the Persian Gulf, around about 60 miles off to the southeast. The main British base was Basra International Airport. Fixed-wing aircraft would fly into this daily. It was the HQ location and it was where the majority of the military personnel were based, and it was also the main logistical hub. The three main bases within the city were the Shat Al Arab Hotel, the Old State Building, and Basra Palace. These pictures are of the Old State Building, and as you can see, it's completely surrounded by the local community. Not a good idea. These pictures are of Basra Palace. I was there for almost a year. Great location, really enjoyed it. But I could see the writing on the wall back in May 2006, and as movement through the city became more and more dangerous, I relocated my team back to the international airport. Brick Mill faced the daily challenge of getting the personnel their food, their water, ammunition, fuel, and everything else they needed to complete their mission from the airport to the bases. But remember, after May 2006, this was done by road. But the problem was that there were only three ways into the city. Leaving the relative safety of the airport, the first option was the green route. The second option was the yellow route. And the third option was the red route. Now, when working in asymmetrical conflicts, military formations use speed, aggression, and surprise to enhance their rate of success. But military convoys with tracked vehicles are slow, so speed's out the window. Aggression is okay, because the soldiers were professional and they were able to give a good account of themselves if they were attacked. But with a choice of only three routes, you also lose the element of surprise, because it didn't take long for the insurgents to figure out which route that the convoys were going to use to come in or exit from the city. They were only able to use one out of the three mitigation strategies. That's not good. I wrote an article about the brick mill pullout from Basra, and it's on my website. You might find it interesting. In the early hours of the 5th of April, a day before the Challenger was blown up, Lieutenant Joanna York and 3 other soldiers were killed when their Warrior armoured vehicle was blown up by an IED, a roadside bomb. This made headlines as Joanna was good friends with Prince William, as they went through Sandhurst. The report said that they were on patrol, and I suppose they were in essence. They were moving from their location at the Shat Al Arab Hotel to Basra Airport. That night they chose the yellow route, and they got hit just here. I'd driven that way on a number of occasions. I knew it well. It was in close proximity to an Iraqi police checkpoint. The device that killed Joanna, her comrades, many of the other British soldiers, and blew up the Challenger tank just 24 hours later, was a special IED called an explosively formed projector, an EFP. Nothing new. Technology's been around since World War II. It's known as a shaped charge. A slug of copper surrounded by high explosive which can be directed at the target. When the device is initiated, the explosion liquefies the copper and sends the molten mass at a hypervelocity towards the intended target. It will cut through pretty much anything, including the most sophisticated high-tech layered systems on any tank. I took this picture of an EFP a couple of years ago. It was set up by Al-Shabaab in Somalia to attack the Kenyan Defence Force. Luckily, they discovered it before it went off. And here is what an EFP did to my armoured Land Cruiser in Iraq. This vehicle is ballistic 6 rating. It went through it like a hot knife through butter. The technology to make EFPs was given to the insurgents in Basra by the Iranians. Making the EFPs became a cottage industry in Basra, and they were then distributed by the Iraqi police. I write about this phenomenon, this dynamic, In my book, Damascus Redemption, I put the link in the show notes below. It's been described as Da Vinci Code meets Bravo 20. It's a rip-roaring yarn. I am sure you will love it. The Iraqi police being part of the problem and not the solution is something that British government is still coming to terms with. It's another contentious subject. Basically, Britmill created a Frankenstein monster when they equipped and trained the Iraqi police. But let's get back to challenging. So on the morning of the 7th of April, I made my daily visit to MND Southeast Military HQ. You could sense there was a bad atmosphere. My intelligence analyst, who'd been on the night before and was just finishing the shift, called me over and said, you need to hear what went on last night. Fine, yeah, no problem at all. Come over to the drone desk. So I went over to the drone desk. I remember it really, really well. And the chief petty officer was there. And he was irate. He was really concerned. He was really not happy at all. And he said to me, they ignored us. They ignored us. I said, what did they ignore? He said, we were watching live feed from our drone in the area that the Warrior had been blown up the day before, 24 hours before. They were watching that area because they knew that there was another Britmill convoy going to take that route later on in the evening. What they saw was suspicious activity. To them, it looked like that there were insurgents there that were digging a hole and placing another IED, virtually in the same place. What they did was that they called over the major who was in charge of the operation at that time, and they explained to him their concerns and what they thought was going on. He looked at the live footage and turned around and said, no, I don't think they are placing an IED. I just think they are farmers doing farmer stuff. It was the middle of the night. So the intelligence was ignored, the convoy went ahead, and the Challenger tank was blown up by the IED, which penetrated the hull. And I understand because of that the soldier inside, one soldier was wounded and the other guy lost at least one leg. Now, you can turn around and say, it's a war, fine, things like that happen. I understand that, I get that. I was a soldier and I've been in high threat environments for 18 years. But as a risk manager, as somebody whose job it is to keep people safe, I go out of my way to collect information, to collect intelligence, so that I can make informed decisions. And if I'm not happy, then I will restrict a mission or stop it completely. Why that officer chose to ignore that information, I don't know. I really don't know. Only he knows why he chose to ignore it. The consequences of him ignoring that information was life-changing injuries to a soldier, and all that could have been avoided. I'm Richard C. Pendry, and over the last 18 years I've been on the tip of the spear in the war on terror. I've seen a lot of stuff, I've been a lot of places. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like and subscribe if you have, and there's plenty more where this came from.